Welcome back to Miss B Biology. This is a revision lesson on the topic active transport. So grab your book and grab your pen and let us begin. The lesson objectives are to 1. Describe how substances are transported in and out of cells by active transport, and 2. Describe examples of active transport in plants and animals. Substances are constantly transported in and out of cells. Some substances can be transported down a concentration gradient by diffusion, meaning they're moving from where there are more to where there are less. While other substances are transported against a concentration gradient by active transport. These substances, they are moving from where there are less substances to where there are more. Let us talk about diffusion for a bit. Diffusion is the net movement of particles from a region of higher concentration to lower concentration. In diffusion, we say that a concentration gradient is established. What do we mean by that? A concentration gradient is established when there is a difference in the amount of particles in two areas. For example, you're seeing where there are 9 particles on your left and only 2 on the right. So that's a concentration gradient. Last thing about diffusion, no energy is required for this process, as the particles are moving down a concentration gradient, meaning it is a passive process. So no energy required. Active transport is the movement of substances from a lower concentration to a higher concentration across a cell membrane. This process happens across a cell membrane because the proteins that are embedded in the cell membrane are responsible for moving these substances from lower to higher concentration. All right, so look at this diagram. Right, so the particles are moving from left to right, from lower to higher concentration. These substances are said to be moving against a concentration gradient. Active transport is an active process, as the name suggests, and so energy is required for this process. The energy for this process comes from respiration that mainly happens at the mitochondria. Let us now look at differences between active transport and diffusion. So in active transport, particles move from a lower to a higher concentration, while for diffusion, particles move from a higher to a lower concentration. Particles in active transport move against a concentration gradient, while for diffusion, particles move down a concentration gradient. Energy is required for active transport, no energy required for diffusion. As mentioned before, active transport requires energy. Any cell that is involved in active transport are rich in mitochondria. Mitochondria is the site for aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is the release of energy, quite a bit of energy, with the use of oxygen. Let us now look at an example of active transport in plants. Plants absorb mineral ions from the soil. Magnesium ions, for example, are absorbed from the soil for chlorophyll production. Nitrates for protein production. These ions are absorbed by the root hair cells, right? So in the root hair cells, you'll find more ions compared to the soil. And so these ions now would have to be actively transported from the soil, which is lower concentration, to the root hair cells, which is higher concentration. In order for this to happen, remember the root hair cells need to be adapted for this process. And so in the root hair cells, you'll find many mitochondria. Let us now look at active transport in animals. We're going straight on to the small intestine to look at how glucose is absorbed by active transport. So active transport allows glucose to be absorbed from a lower concentration, which is inside the lumen of the small intestine, to a higher concentration, which is in the blood. The cells in the wall of the small intestine are rich in mitochondria that release energy for the active transport of these molecules. Thank you so much for watching and all the best in your exams. Bye bye.